Welcome to my house. I'm going to watch a Doctor Who story nominated by a friend of mine. I've asked them to tell me what it is they love about it, and I have to guess what their favourite things are.
Hi Toby. Hi everyone. My name's Emma Reeves. I'm a writer. I've written a bit for Big Finish. I've written quite a lot of CBBC, and I've also written for stage. And I am here today to talk about Timelash. Now, I am not going to pretend that it's one of my favourite Doctor Who stories or advocate for it being one of the best Doctor Who stories, you'll be relieved to know, but I do have very fond memories of it because I remember watching it as a child. So it takes me to happy times and places. And so in the spirit of the podcast, I'm going to talk about Timelash.
Okay, whereas John Cooper, when he chose Time Flight, said, "I love this," Emma's at least something in his go, "I'm not even sure it's that good." So with that in mind, I've now got an hour and a half in which I need to find the positives in a story that the person who's chosen it has even said isn't up to much. So this'll be interesting. And I'm also minded to remind regular viewers and listeners that I have again not been able to find the Blu-ray remote. So again, for half an hour, and I've been working today quite hard, so I'm quite knackered, looking for a device which operates a device that is otherwise useless, that otherwise may as well be a brick, that otherwise may as well be a burnt-out android. So people, scientists who make the future, just put a play button. That's all I ask. It could save me an awful lot of time. So with that in mind, having stolen my partner's phone and made that into a remote control, I've had to steal it off her prone sleeping body and use her dead face to open up her phone. Yeah, I know the lengths that I go to. It's essentially like taking the eyeballs from a corpse in order to do ocular recognition software. It's essentially what I've done. But she's not dead. Okay, she's not dead. I mean, she's sort of dead to me because she's put the remote somewhere. Anyway, I'm in a good mood now. So, press play in 3, 2, 1, go. It's Timelash. Now this is because I remember at the time. Did I think any stories were any different to other stories? I hadn't pressed record on the microphone, but it's all right, I've picked it up. Technology. So, things are looking up. The sound on the podcast version has presumably just got slightly better. Timelash by Glenn McCoy. And I'm thinking, I don't know that name. This is his only Doctor Who, of course. My brother had a star chart a bit like that on his wall. And it made me feel quite comforted to know that, because my brother was into astrology and stuff, and he's sort of very wise and sensible, so it seemed quite good that one of those was on Doctor Who. But the same token, I was slightly, should Doctor Who have something that's on a teenager's wall? But anyway, Timelash. I remember thinking when we got to this point in the season, well, this must be the last story then, because the season seemed to have gone on for quite a long time. I was very pleased because I kept expecting Doctor Who to end, and especially I think because the episodes were going to be fewer because they were 45 minutes. I think I was expecting a shorter season, so actually the season ended up feeling longer because I'd expected it to be shorter, which I think has informed my pessimistic nature, where I always assume things to go badly, and then if they go well, it's a pleasant surprise. I am very fond of Colin Baker, and I will probably tell you my Colin Baker story, which is why he will always be a special Doctor to me. The first Doctor I ever met. I think anybody that's ever met Colin Baker as a young fan would probably attest that he smashes that thing about never meeting your heroes into oblivion because his conduct to young fans, and I've seen him do it to young fans now, terrified of meeting a TV Doctor Who, is exemplary. I think, and the way that he treated me as a young lad who, as we will discover, probably outstayed his welcome and probably introduced himself in a way that was slightly not according to protocol. What a gracious and generous and decent man he was, and I think he's always been a great ambassador to the show. Now, obviously I'm in a dilemma here. I remember this model shop for some reason, thinking, I think I thought it was set in Aztec times, and I thought we might be getting a historical. I was very excited by that idea. Now, Pennant Roberts is never lauded as a great director. The casting of these three minor characters is a sign that he's pretty good in certain regards. Has Martin Gower nearly sworn yet? I think, does he do that when they first arrive? There's a bit where he sort of goes, whoosh, and it sounds like it, and some people say, there's a swear word in Doctor Who. That's wishful thinking. He doesn't swear, but it's almost like he does. And now he just sort of wanders around to get caught. But yeah, I think we've missed a bit. There's so many bits at the beginning to catch. On Karfel, certainly, that are worthy of talking about, which means I might ignore the TARDIS scenes a bit. Forgive me. But I think that's also a sign that TARDIS scenes during this period can be a little superfluous and lengthy. But those three actors, first up, headline news is that Aram, Christine Kavanagh, who was about to become, was she in a thing called? She had the leads in a couple of things. She was about to become pretty big news, but also was written, I think, as a male character, and I think I will probably say this every time I do a Pennant Roberts story, but it's not to be sniffed at. If you look at how many supporting characters in television of this time, and particularly Doctor Who, are men, frankly, parts that could be anything are perhaps, I think, made a little bit more interesting, and certainly in terms of the working life of aspiring actresses, giving female actors the chance to play parts that otherwise wouldn't have been open to them. Stephen McIntosh here is one of our leading actors now, and this must be an early job for him. He's very thin, which is very useful on camera, as I will prove but by being the opposite. So you've got Christine Kavanagh, who goes on to have a superb career, and then had a bit of a different. I think maybe she had a family. She was married to, I know she was married to Jack Ellis, I think. I've just said I know, and then the character. Well, no wonder you got caught tight here. You just walked off, having nearly sworn. Do you see what I did there? I said I know, then I said something, and then added I think, because I suddenly had that moment of doubt where I thought I could be wrong. That is how I spend my entire life. My entire life is spent going, I'm going to say a thing and then immediately doubt myself, so have to add a caveat of uncertainty. But yeah, Jack Ellis for Footballers' Wives, good actor. I think she was married to him. So she did disappear for a bit, and I remember thinking, because she did have quite a few sort of telly leads, but she's been back doing stuff since, and I did see her in a couple of things. So she's a sign of her. There's Jean Ann Crowley floating around. Karfel's a very interesting place. The seating there is arranged a bit like the seating on Gallifrey, where the councillors are seated perfectly to have a conversation with an audience, but not so good to chat amongst themselves. At least, unlike on Gallifrey, they turning their heads is not problematic for these people. Eric Deacon, this actor here playing Mikros, who has, I think, a certain attack. Has he just said my favourite line of the whole thing? I don't think he has. Not only is our planet divided, but we are also under imminent threat of invasion from our former allies, the Bandrills. There it is. Allies, the Bandrills. You know, she knows they're your former allies. It's a beautiful piece of exposition. It's not, but it's a bit like the bit in MasterChef where they shout what they know at each other. You know, they have to impress the critics, otherwise they're not getting through to the semi-final. He has to make sure this souffle rises, otherwise it'll be a disaster. Not only is our planet divided, but our country is under imminent threat by our former allies, the Bandrills. Karfel doesn't get much tougher than this. His Tahir, Martin Gower, who was in a thing called Growing Pains a bit after this. And it's also a very clever use of resources, Martin Gower, as Tahir, because he's about to get chucked into the Timelash. But after that, he becomes the voice of their former allies, the Bandrills. He is the voice of the Bandrill ambassador, which is nice for an actor playing a small part to get an extra bit to do, and a good use of resources because he's already in the studio. I like Eric Deacon. He was an actor that seemed to be going places at the time, and he's had a very good career. He's brother of the actor Brian Deacon, who was once married to Rula Litska. And Eric Deacon was, I think he was Duffy's boyfriend in Casualty, was he? He was in a thing called Hard Cases. But he's since become a writer and written for all sorts of telly. And Stephen McIntosh, a star of the future. Muppets Christmas Carol, Luther. He's done all sorts of movies and TV. Very good, hitting somebody on the arm, dismissively acting from Paul Darrow here, who I'm sure we will discuss at great length and with a smile on our face and a song in our hearts, because he even stands entertainingly, and sometimes that's what you need in a programme like this, which I think does flirt with blandness occasionally. I wouldn't say that you always want a Darrow, but when Darrow brings what he brings when it's needed, it's very welcome. So bye-bye, Stephen McIntosh. I wonder if he's ever talked about being in Doctor Who. I'm not saying he's done this. I do sometimes get cross with actors who are given an early break in a programme and I go, yeah, but it was a bit rubbish, and I was a bit rubbish. You were a young actor given a chance to be in a TV show. And certainly saying Martin Clunes, it's a lot better than you put it across when they show an out of context clip of you in a silly costume, which is supposed to be a silly costume, really, in a really good production. And you could just say, yeah, I was young and I was starting out and it was brilliant. So do that next time. And I'm not saying that's actually necessarily Martin Clunes' fault. I think the way those chat shows and programmes are sometimes set up, they're like, why don't we just say, before you were famous, everything was terrible. And I think it actually takes a brave person to go, actually, no, I really needed that part, and it was really helpful to me, and I learned a lot. Anthony Karf, when I talked to him about being in The Visitation, which was his first telly, was so keen to talk about it, and he's had an amazing career since then, because he went, well, no, people were really welcoming, and I'm really pleased that I got to do this, decent part and spend a week rehearsing at the BBC, and it was a really good way into television. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with starting out somewhere. It's a good thing. And as I say, I'm not saying that either Clunes or McIntosh don't do that. It just reminded me when I think sometimes the way it's been framed for Martin Clunes, particularly in shows. Now that I love the android, I wasn't sure I would. I'm not sure I love the person who hit Jean Ann Crowley over the head with a spade just before recording, because she floats through this slightly like she's dazed. And I've not quite got to the bottom of it. I don't know if somebody slipped something into her teeth. Because she's a good actress. She was in Tenko. In fact, these are all actors of good pedigree. I always like a named off-screen character. So Tola is Malin Rennis's wife, who is in hospital, and this will be important later. He's doing very sort of distant, suspicious acting here, Eric Deacon. And I like Neil Hallett, who plays Malin Rennis, who I believe I've got a book about you know, picture postcards, saucy 70s British, you know, sex comedy movies, and apparently he's in quite a few of those. See how I went to, apparently then, I haven't seen them, actually haven't, I've seen a few of the Confessions of Window Cleaners, but that's it, I've not seen any with him in, but he gets an entry in this book, so, but I think he's got great nobility here. He's like a cross between, sort of, he's got a bit of John Franklin Robbins about him, isn't he? Yeah, he's like somebody's stuck John Franklin Robbins' nose on an older David Bailey's face. So he's got a sort of hawk-like thing about him. I love the lighting in here. Karfel, whenever I think of Karfel, I think of rather a beige planet with, I mean, I do like these costumes actually, which are by Alan Hughes, who I hadn't realised until I did my in memoriam video when he died a couple of years ago, just what a big deal he was. He designed Diana Rigg's costumes for the Avengers, and this is his only Doctor Who, and I quite like these because they look comfortable, they look suitably, yeah, they look practical and comfortable. I think sometimes clothes on other planets can get a bit carried away with themselves. I think they're doing. I think some of this is quite clunky. We have to be a bit honest about it. Timelash does not. Let's be honest. Timelash does not have a good reputation, and I think these two men are having to do a certain kind of acting that I don't think you necessarily would do anymore. But I think they're doing what's required in this scene, which is, I mean, is it shot on one camera? No, there must be cuts to another angle, but it's all shot from, yeah, but it's all, there's a close-up of some hands, but it's all shot from one direction. But I like this because, well, we're gonna have a thing that poor old Rennis is gonna have to do. I do, and I like the lighting there as well. I think the lighting in this is very impressive, and and this is a nice character moment because you can tell from the look on his face, and we've already had her seeded into the story, but we will never meet Tola because she's in hospital and she's going to have her support system turned off. And I also like the whole thing of a hospital with a support system. Now, this may be a different planet, this might be futuristic stuff going on, but we all know that hospitals have life support systems for people who are poorly, and it's not, and it's not necessarily a Doctor Who-y sort of thing, somebody sort of off stage on a life support system, and these events impacting on the life of that. Now they're recording this bit, aren't they? Because this bit gets played a bit later on. All right, I hope. But I mean, he has been sort of set up, and he has just, Malin Rennis has just pulled the control switch off the controls and sort of stuck it back on because it's now out of vision. But yes, he pulled the set apart there and covered it valiantly. Yeah, he does have a noble countenance, a great face. I have to say, at the time, the androids seem a bit 80s because breakdancing and body popping, and I've probably used the wrong phraseology, but some of the cool kids at school did the sort of body popping, breakdancing, whatever you call it. I'm now sounding like a geography teacher, kind of trying to get down with the kids. But that movement and that sort of, turning of the head and moving of the hands seemed a bit akin to that, and it was like Doctor Who was drawing on an existing thing. And of course, there's nothing worse than now reflecting the politics of the time and satirising them and turning them on their heads or commentating upon them or using them as a driver for storytelling is interesting, but it's a bit like the time controller in Remembrance of the Daleks. They were in something else. There was an old Edmund show that had them, but they were also in certain shops. You know, the shops where you buy things for people that they don't really want that look quite cool. You know, those shops that we're always somehow drawn to have this thing that has no practical value, is slightly overpriced, and you're not sure if you want, but you won't throw away. And I think using sort of breakdancing movement seemed to be drawing from what was current and seemed a bit like folly. Whereas actually now, you know, whatever it is, 30 odd years later, it doesn't seem especially 80s to me, because so much time has passed. It actually, I think, works within the context of the story, perhaps now, perhaps better than it did then. But that's maybe because I'm from the 80s, and maybe it's everything you imagine about the 80s with horror. A purple-faced man with peroxide hair, breakdancing across Karfel. But I am actually, to my surprise, rather delighted by the android. We will talk a lot about Borad and Robert Ashby. I mean, he has a terrific voice, and that ageing effect is not unlike the one in City of Death. And it's okay. Yeah, it's. Yeah, it's Borad. Yeah, I like that. I think that's great. I think that's an attempt to do something slightly different, but an attempt to evoke the robotic, which is what you want from a robot. Peter Robert Scott, an actor I don't know from much else apart from that. I know he's invented a board game, and I did look him because I knew he was on Twitter. He's only got 12 followers, so follow him. I don't think he's updated since 2013, but nonetheless. Now, I sort of don't believe any of this.
Why wasn't I told before about this?
Yes, it's. I mean, I don't think either of these people are acting believably, but Paul Darrow is enjoying himself so much that I can't help but admire his chutzpah in going, I'm going for this. But that is not to say that I don't think Paul Darrow is a good actor. I actually think Paul Darrow is a better actor than he, but who also did not take himself particularly seriously. I remember when Blake Seven, I thought Avon was terribly serious, apart from the sort of sarcastic lines things. But Avon was a very serious person, and I remember when I'd not met Paul Darrow that I thought he might be a bit intense. That's that bit where he grabs his absent amulet. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of scenery chewing going on by Paul Darrow, and if the scenery is made of ham, then he's committing an act of cannibalism as well. And I'm not sure how well advised it is. I don't know, but it is enjoyable. So do you know what? In a story which is full of an awful lot of compromises, this was a troubled production in terms of timing and the scripts being ready, which I'm sure I will gas on about later. What he's doing is, and actors could do it in those days. Actors could go, look at Graham Crowden in Horns of Diamond. Actors could go, I'm not sure about this, I'm at least going to make sure that I entertain the people at home. And that wouldn't be, you would risk your career now, because there's so much less being made. But I think that, you know, I think we lose something with the way that drama was churned out at this time. An actor going, well, it's a bit of a dull one this week, I'm going to give it a bit of colour, is one of the things we've lost from our cultural landscape. And I don't think we're any better off for it. And I thought Paul Darrow might be a bit intense and a bit serious when I met him. And I found, to my delight, he was a real turn. In fact, almost too much of a turn. He was like a sort of bit of a sort of music hall comic. He had a wag and a gag for every occasion, and I did a charity event with him that I was asked to do him and Tom Baker, I mean, I know, I was very, very fortunate, and I shared a dressing room with those two guys, and I thank the people who organised that, who asked me to do it. My goodness. And Paul was very, very, very game, and he was very, very, very funny, in a way that sort of smouldering screen presence that he has perhaps would not have indicated, even when he's going a bit OTT. As I say, he was a bit of a turn. Whereas this intensity that he has on screen in Blake 7, I think he's absolutely brilliant. And there's moments, and I think there are moments where he occasionally enjoys himself a little bit too much. But there are moments where he does acting where it's a tight close-up on his face, and he's sort of inscrutable, but you can see the keen intelligence and the calculating nature of his character, and the fact that he's probably prepared to do anything, and he's doing it without changing the expression on his face. And that is brilliant, brilliant screen acting. I love Paul Darrow. I think he's great. I don't think he's using all of those tools in this, and I think he could have been memorable if he'd made his approach slightly more serious. But I'm not going to question an actor of his stature and presence going. And I think he probably took one look at Colin Baker's costume and thought, I've got to do what Colin Baker did in Arc of Infinity, which is go, I've got to make the most of what I've got here. And that worked for Colin Baker. And as I've said, I'm a big fan of Colin Baker, but I do have to acknowledge I'm not sure that the look, which I loved at the time because I found Davison's costume a bit bland, and I like the idea of being totally tasteless, but you know, I've made wardrobe choices then that I would probably regret now. I'll probably regret these in the future. Life is full of regrets. But I think a bit like, unlike the android, which actually contradicts what I'm about to say, is that I know John Nathan Turner with the neon logo and the Doctor's costume, he had a thing about bringing Doctor Who into the 1980s. Well, I think you have to be careful of bringing Doctor Who into the time that you are, because the time that you are seems fresh and new, but nothing dates more quickly than the present vision of the funky future, or the present adoration of the things that are current and new and zappy, but in 15 years will look old and dated. I also question the idea of having lethal plants as a decoration in your beige city. Your city is entirely beige and triangles, Karfel. I've just noticed a load of, because Maynard Renaissance control panel and amulets were triangle. These are very triangles. It's a bit like, at the time, Channel 4 showed films that were going to have a bit of naughty content in it, perhaps over and above what you'd have seen in a movie that Neil Hallett was in. And it had a red triangle in the corner to say sauciness alert, so either be offended or prepared to commit some of this to the memory banks. And it's like Karfel. Karfel is warning that its walls may soon contain graphic sexual content. Oh, there's even triangles on this wall. I think there's something rather. There's a sort of rather saddenability to the bandrills. I think they were originally to be called the girdles, the girdels. But obviously, when you say it's girdle, it sounds like a girdle. You don't want an alien called a girdle. He's enjoying himself, but it reminds me a bit of my dog when he sits up like that. Oh, he looks so sad. I love the Bandrill ambassador. Now, here's David Ashton as Kendron. David Ashton is still about. I hadn't realised at the time who he was, but I remember Brass was a series that was on that was fantastic, that I didn't get to see as much as I'd like to. And he's in Brass, and he's also in Hamish Macbeth. Scottish actor David Ashton. But he's also a writer of a detective called McCleavey, I think, that there's books of, and also been played by Brian Cox on the radio. But he's curious, I think. Ken John in this, he sort of plays it as an old woman. I think everybody's sort of having a go to perhaps give it a bit of oomph, because, as I've alluded to, you have very 80s hair. From the back, you could be Adrian Smed from TJ Hooker. Sazin at the Falchion Rocks, I remember that. They had real timing problems with this. Episode 1 overran, episode 2 underran. There was talk of bringing the cliffhanger back, but John Nathan Turner liked the Timelash cliffhanger, so I think some of the Perry stuff gets moved to episode 2. But what that means is that some stuff in this episode was cut, and as we will discover in episode 2, some extra stuff had to be filmed. And I remember when I spoke to Colin Baker, he was in a play called Corpse at the Grand Theatre, Wolverhampton. It was him and it was Jack Watling, and I was lucky enough to be taken to the theatre by my mum and by a friend of ours. And I'd heard talk of meeting actors at the stage door. When you've killed the girl, go and attend to the bees and make sure you bring back some honey. And so we went to the stage door to meet this man, Doctor Who, Colin Baker. He was no longer Doctor Who. He'd not long finished being Doctor Who. Now I know the stage door is where the actors leave, and you can actually contrive a hangabout, and now sometimes lots of people hang around outside stage doors collecting autographs. We actually found a door in an alleyway that was a metal door that was open, and you could see props in. And we went through there and had a bit of a walk around and ended up on the stage. And the stage manager came on and said, hello, can I help you? And my friend, who's much older than me, he was sort of 40s, Derek, a friend of ours who was a local handyman that took pity on a boring child like me and would come to the theatre with me and my mum sometimes. And Derek was going to do the talking because he was a brave grown-up and I was a pathetic coward and still am. And Derek said, we're here to see Mr. Baker. And this woman said, is he expecting you? And Derek said, yes. So she took us and knocked on Colin Baker's dressing room door and opened the door. And she said, Mr. Baker, you're expecting these people? And he went, oh, yes. Now, he wasn't, but he obviously didn't want us to get into trouble. Welcomed us into his dressing room, signed a few things. He was, his post-show, I've got a couple of pictures of him. He's covered in sweat because it was a very energetic show. And I asked if I could come back and interview him for my fanzine, which I never did. I never did the fanzine, but I wanted to. She's just murdered a man with the decorative plant, although I suppose he has got the beekeeper thing on, he might have survived. And even the door handles are triangles. I don't know. This is where the advantage comes from being followed by a breakdancer, is that they take a while to turn a corner. And we came back a couple of days later and I interviewed Colin Baker, and do you know what? He was amazing. He was so kind. He gets his half-hour call. I've still got the tape. Nobody's ever heard this tape, actually. It would probably make me blush. Rebels, Dank Tunnels and the Morlocks. That's a great title for a Doctor Who book. And Colin Baker gets his half-hour call, which, is when you have to start to get ready, and he's in drag in the opening of this play. But he goes, that means I've only got about 5 minutes. He gets his 5-minute call, and he's still dressed as Colin Baker, because he insisted on answering all my questions. I only discovered many years later, when I worked in professional theatre, exactly how much time he'd given me, and exactly how he didn't hurry me. It didn't betray in his, he was not remotely peeved. He took time, he showed me out. Jack Watling knocked on the door and stuck his head round the door at one point. Oh, if only I'd spoken to Jack Watling as well. But I'm not, no, let's concentrate on the positive. I can have no regrets about my first Doctor Who I ever met, was Colin Baker, who was so kind and so indulgent, and I think the paragon of how to behave in front of consumers of your work, which isn't always easy. And I've known people who have been collared by people at the wrong time, or people who've expressed themselves awkwardly because they're nervous, and it can be annoying. And people, some people are just rude and awful, and I can see why celebrities sort of snap and get reported badly when actually you don't know quite how the person's dealt with them. Colin Baker. I did a thing with him. Must have been 20 years later, and I saw two young fans, very nervous, and they didn't really know he was either because they were new series fans, but they were told that he was a Doctor Who. So also with Colin Baker there was a kind of, he sort of knew that it wasn't necessarily all about him, but again, he didn't go, oh, well, if you're fans of the new thing. He was kind, he was courteous, and he, most importantly, he put these kids at ease, because kids are nervous even if they didn't quite know that he was Doctor Who and all that sort of thing. I thought all of that stuff was quite effective. We've got some new characters in the caves. That burning android is a bit of a shock. So yes, I've distracted a bit from the story there, but I think it's important to put the context of the appreciation that I have for Colin Baker. I like this shift into the caves because we suddenly get an impression of stuff going on underground. And these two are very interesting actors. Dick in Ashworth. You didn't get... What I like about Dick in Ashworth is that he is a genuine northerner, which it seems odd to say that now that we have much more representation on screen. But even sort of tough rebels were rarely accorded authentic northern accents. Unless there was a reason for them so to do. And he'd been in Brookside, Dick in Ashworth. He's in Krull as well. He gets quite far near the end in Krull. And he's always had a sort of fairly authentic... I think if I needed to cast a binman or a lorry driver, I would cast Dick in Ashworth. And I don't mean that as an insult either. I think he's got a real genuine quality about it. Just noticed he's wearing an earring too, and I think that gives him a sort of earthiness that is unusual for Doctor Who, and it's unusually plausible. And I love the fact there's a picture of Joe Grant as well. There's a publicity shot of Joe Grant from Mind of Evil. No, I'm not going to commit to where that picture's from. And of course, seeing Joe, as a youngster. I know John Nathan Turner now gets into trouble for invoking the past. Guilty. I was the sort of fan that wanted references to the past. I wanted pictures of Joe Grant because the olden days was good to me. We used to worship the older days. I know now when the habit is to look back at the older days and say how rubbish they must have been and how everyone there was stupid, which I don't think is a thing that we do that is good. I think it is unhealthy and I think it is arrogant. We used to look back on the older days and go, wow, it was amazing. Those people who paved the way to where we are now lived there doing amazing things. I think I'm looking back to the olden days and saying the way we looked at the olden days in the olden days was better than the way we do now. So even now, so here we have Herbert in a beautiful set, which I think is shared with the tripods. But I'd forgotten actually how nice it is, and it's a wonderful contrast. And you've got the outside light coming in there as well. The lighting is excellent. Now I remember liking Herbert at the time, and subsequently finding him quite annoying. So he was he was a character I loved on original broadcast. But I think being enthusiastic and a bit guileless is hard to act without being annoying, because he's supposed to be quite annoying. But actually on the evidence of this, I actually think he's juggling this rather well, and he's not done a massive amount since, and maybe that had primed me to think he might not carry it off, but he's being asked to do some difficult things as an actor here, and I don't think he's doing a bad job. Although, oh yes, I do seem to recall this bit being a bit silly, so I may eat my words. Well, it's okay. Now that outside set, I mean, it looks totally pony now. I seem to recall at the time was not problematic. I think our eyes as 80s viewers were attuned to go, yeah, that's the outside. And outside is depicted in that way. It's slightly, it's like a theatre set now. And we would strive for more realism, but I'm uncomfortable out of realism, and I know it's not real. I think so long as I thought that was quite funny. So long as they're the program makers are are giving a sense of time and place, I will go with it. I don't think, I don't think there's anything gained for me to go, well, that sky in the background is not real. Well, you've completely failed to transport me. If I jump aboard, it's my choice to be transported or not. Tracy Louise Ward as Kat. Now, I think Jean Ann Crowley was originally cast as Kat, and Tracy Louise Ward here was cast quite late. She's an amazing woman. Oh, she was a model in Paris. She's from good stock. She's Tracy Worcester, I think. So I don't know quite how the aristocracy works, but she's a lady or a baroness or one of them. But she's put her energies to great use in terms of the ecology and the treatment of pigs in captivity, but as well as being a model, as well as having had an acting career, because she's in a thing called Cat's Eyes. Oh, she's Cats in this, and she was in Cat's Eyes. I think there should be more people who are in programmes named after characters they've played in Doctor Who, and I'll see if I can come up with some, or I may have just embarked upon something that doesn't end up anywhere. I'm not quite sure where Vina is looking when she's talking to anybody. She seems not to be able to. I do think it's a bit like in a cartoon where she's been thwacked on the back of the head and is sort of doing that, and is not quite focusing on anybody. It's almost like Vina, when she went through the Timelash, was not quite landed in quite the same time and space as everybody else. But she's interesting as well, Jean Ann Crowley, because there was something to do with her in internet chat rooms. Was she? I thought she was maybe the first person to have a conversation in an internet chat room, but I think last time I checked that wasn't the case. But there's something to do. But she's now. I think she's back in Ireland, and she's done up houses, and I think she stood for Parliament. I'll do a podcast about Doctor Who actors who've stood for Parliament. But she was in Teka, which was a great show for Doctor Who people, and Doctor Who directors. Oh, and indeed Pennant Roberts. Tenko, a series set in a woman's prisoner of war camp in Japan, or Japanese prisoner of war camp in World War II. A series where Pennant Roberts didn't have to cast some male parts with female actors because it was a female-centric show. But Pennant Roberts is not the most lauded of Doctor Who directors, and a lot of this is a bit, I think, unambitious in terms of execution, in terms of sort of blocking and camera work. But perhaps he had different ambitions. He was hugely thought of by people that worked with him, and I think also importantly very well liked. He gets a bit of a bad rep with Doctor Who. I don't think he was always lucky. Studio blocks moved around for Warriors of the Deep, and a monster arriving late and still with wet paint. This one, a new writer. I think they'd wanted to abandon this, and it was sort of too late. But I remember putting it to Colin Baker when I did the interview. What are you looking at, Jean-Anne? Is there something on the telly that you're distracted by? It's like she's got her own iPhone in the sky. I think this is quite funny. I actually think David Chandler is doing very well, because Herbert is annoying, but the performance is not annoying, and that may sound like a contradiction, but it's not. I think you need to show why your character is say winding the Doctor up, which is funny, but you actually like him. I actually think he's quite charming. Yes. Okay. So good. Yeah. No. I'm. This isn't going to be an exercise in wishful thinking. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to pretend that Timelash is going to be is one of the best Doctor Who stories of all time. I'm going to watch every Doctor Who story I am challenged to watch, but it is part of the rich tapestry of a television series that I think is the most important part of my life in many, many ways. And that means even liking the bits of it that aren't very good. That's actually I like the staging of that with poor old David Ashton and Peter Robert Scott having to be this sort of silent chorus of people acting in the background. Prepare the Timelash. Now, that must be a wig that Darrow's got on, because of course he's in Doctor Who and the Silurians before he was famous as Avon, because of course this had Jacqueline Pearce had been in earlier in the season in the Two Doctors, so it knew microcephalic apostate. And of course I remember, when Doctor Who had sort of flowery dialogue, there's part of you that goes, this is good because it's interesting dialogue, pricks your ears up, and it just shut up. I like that. I do like that bit that David Ashton says, we can't do this. Shut up. But I don't think they quite get it right in the Sixth Doctor's era in a way that Robert Holmes, who used rich dialogue and phraseology somehow, and even words like jackanapes and all that sort of thing, they seem to fit organically into the style of storytelling, whereas microcephalic apostate feels like I've swallowed the thesaurus. But Colin's very good at showing, Colin Baker's very good at showing pain whilst being stage gripped, so there we go. Eric Deacon. Yeah, he was. I remember being quite excited that he was in it, because he was a young, vital actor. Oh, yes, there were 2 days. Okay, so on paper, this is a heck of a cast, actually. But I haven't even mentioned Dennis Carey. I will mention Dennis Carey next week, or in a minute. Alan Waring, production manager, who went on to be a fine Doctor Who director. And is still directing at the moment, directing Emmerdale down the road. Where Alan Arbuthnot and Alec Wheel, both sadly no longer with us, but two names to conjure on the credit to Doctor Who. I love being able to read the credits. Vanessa Poulton worked on the Macra Terror, for goodness sake. Why do I know this stuff? Bob Cove, I don't think, did another Doctor Who, did he? Right. Okay. Oh, I've got to hope that this remote control is still working, because I'm not able to do this the way I have been doing it. It's paused. Brilliant. Oh, I love this new phone remote control. I don't care about the other. Yes, I do. I do need the other one at some point. So that was episode 1. That rattled by, but I'm aware that I slightly cheated, because I brought my How I Met Colin Baker anecdote out of mothballs, but this is a positive Doctor Who podcast, and so if I need to invoke a story that produces positive endorphins in me in order to propel me through the beige planet Karfel and its stunned princess, then I will. So what did I like about episode 1 of Timelash, and then I'll have to see if Emma chooses something as well. Why is the lift going when I'm trying to work? Might have to pause because somebody's coming down in a lift and is going to interrupt my filming. What are you doing? Yeah, what are you doing? Well, okay, can I finish this piece that I'm filming? Thank you. No. Right. I'll have to do a cut there somehow. So I've got to choose the 2 things that I liked about that. Now, I'm going to save I'm going to choose the Borad. But he didn't do much in that episode. And I know there's trouble ahead next episode. But I don't think I wouldn't have chosen him for this episode simply because he doesn't make himself known. But I do want to talk a lot about the Borad and Robert Ashby because they're both brilliant. But I think I have to reserve those for episode 2 because I don't think Emma would have chosen them for episode 1 either. And I am trying to choose what I think that she might have chosen. But the big surprise to me there that I was really struck by was the lighting by Henry Barber. I'd always thought of Karfel as being rather beige and rather flat. I think the lighting in particularly that scene between Mick Ross and the Malin or Rennis, but also in the caves, and also I think some of the different colour palettes and the outside streaming into that set from the tripods that is Herbert's cottage or whatever it is. I think the lighting surprised me there. Henry Barber's lighting, studio lighting in the 1980s was hard to do, particularly for drama, for Doctor Who, when you're trying to be space age and stuff. Henry Barber's lighting, and I've got to say the android, because that was another pleasant surprise. I went into this potentially on a bit of a downer, and I certainly wouldn't have thought that the android would have tickled me in quite the way that it did, but I thought, divorced from us being in the 1980s, I actually think it's original, it's interesting, and it's an innovative take on how to do an android whilst using a dressed up man. So I'm going to say those two things. I just immediately thought, why didn't I say Paul Darrow? But I've committed now. What's Emma chosen? I bet the first thing she says is Paul Darrow.
Now, my first choice, of course, has to be the late, great Paul Darrow as Teka. The eye rolls, the sycophantic applause, he absolutely gives it his all. He famously wanted to play the part different from Avon. I would have been happy with Avon in the role, but I was also very happy with what we got, which was Paul Darrow's unique Teka, always giving it 100% value, never resorting to equity minimum. Wonderful, wonderful Paul Darrow. My second choice is Kat's showing Perry the picture of Jo Grant in her locket, which is another very vivid memory from childhood, because I was a huge Jo Grant fan, but I'd only ever encountered her through the pages of the Target books, and I'd seen pictures of her on the covers of the books, which are quite often illustrations. So it was a fun moment as a fan to be able to go, Jo Grant, is that Jo Grant? It is Jo Grant. And another aspect of that conversation is it reveals that the Sixth Doctor and Perry obviously do have moments when they're not bickering with each other. When I like to think that Six showed Perry this picture in a sort of a nice heart-to-heart reminiscing conversation about the past, rather than why can't you be more like Jo Grant, which is another possibility. But the main thing is they've got a connection, they talk about stuff, and that confirms this. So it's nice for their relationship, which can otherwise be a bit bickery. So that's episode 1. Now,
thank you, Emma. Interesting. I was so there going, should I try and identify the publicity photo of Jo Grant, that I didn't actually think, yeah, of course, because that was such big news, something from the past. Unlike Emma, I had seen Jo because they'd repeated Curse of Peladon in Doctor Who and the Monsters season of repeats, and I'd fallen in love with her. And on my exercise book, I wrote TH for KM. I've never told her that because that would probably alarm her. So I mean, both of those things I think are fantastic choices. So look, between us, I mean, it's sad that I've not chosen anything Emma's chosen, but between us, we've come up with 4 good things that are all legitimately good things about the much maligned episode 1 of Timelash. They had more trouble with episode 2, but I'm going to go into that with a song in my heart and hope for the future, because I think that rattled along and we had a good time. Not pretending it's something that it isn't, but highlighting the things that were worth highlighting. And I think in this time of darkness, a little bit of light, even in the gloomy tunnels of Karfel and its beige corridors, is something to be chuffed about. So thanks to Emma, thanks to you for watching and for listening. We will return to Timelash in the next episode, but for now, I'm going to depart without a scream. It's not my style.